Good morning, everyone. Wow. I hope you are not too hungover from last night. I am very honored to be even just stand here and open this day. We have amazing speakers following me after this, so you will get better. It's gonna always get better after this. I remember when I came here as a speaker in 2014, 4 years ago. I was just actually guessing around. My English was really not good because I learned my English from watching Friends, American show. I watched it 30 times. Within a year, I was here as a speaker. So you can guess. I was guessing. I'm a good guesser, and I'm a good actor. So I didn't say I don't know who you are. I don't understand what you're saying. But I did try my best to pretend I knew what's going on there. There's a saying in North Korea, mountain and the river would even change during a decade period. I know this is a 10 years conference Oslo Freedom Forum has been, and obviously I also have changed. I grew, and I also evolved as a human being as this conference continues over a 10 years period. Coming from North Korea, to be honest, the hardest thing was actually trusting people. As a child, the first thing I learned was not to even whisper and not to even trust my own back, not to even mention not trusting my sister or mother. I asked this question so many times. Even last year, I was asking my friends, why do you love me? Why do you care for me? I couldn't understand. I couldn't map around my head. You don't get anything from me helping me. Why do you love me? I'm not the important person. I cannot give anything to you. And somehow they say they love me. Honestly, I still have some doubt. I don't know completely understand why they love me. And after going through my journey to come here, it wasn't easy. I was being sold. I was being raped. I was in the moments where I thought I would never be able to come this far, and I would never even alive the next day. But coming through all that unimaginable, I am here, and I am standing in front of you. And I know that you love me. I think it's just Oslo Freedom Forum, of course, taught me a lot of different things. It taught me how many countries in the world, and also how many great things, but also how many problems we have, the similar problems we are facing with the dictatorships. But just meeting you, and you hug me like a family member, and just seeing you really restored my faith in humanity again, that I can love humanity and I can believe in humanity again. And I think that's why we are here. I think through my journey, of course, I learned how to survive, how not to trust people, and how to fight back. But now here in Free World with you, I'm learning how to be a human being, and I'm learning also what it means to be a human being. And you helped me that. So I thank you for every word that you told me, that you love me, and you love all the speakers we have. That I don't think I did a good job, but I often say that, what's the worst thing can happen even I said the wrong thing in front of people? I mean, I'm not gonna be executed after this, right? So I'm safe, no one gonna execute me. But we know that some people come here, actually, the words they say has consequences. They literally risk their life to be here. And some people actually might not be able to come here someday again because of the words they're gonna speak to you today. So thank you for caring for these people and caring for people like myself who risk their family's life and tell you the truth about what's happening in their own countries. So thank you, everyone, for your love and support, and let's start this day. And I believe that you find the strength here in Oslo Freedom Forum as I do. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hello. Good morning, Oslo Freedom Forum. I love you back. I gotta say, I'm deeply humbled to be standing on this stage today. I would like to acknowledge the heroic and courageous souls that have been sharing their stories for the last day and a half. I am jolted and shaken, but also inspired by the capacity of the human spirit to endure and to overcome. And I think that's what this is really about. In spite of impossible obstacles and impossible odds, the human spirit overcomes. That's why I love this theme, rising, because I believe that we do have the capacity to rise. So let me start with that. For me, it all starts with a profound passion for human creativity, a profound passion for human imagination and human ingenuity, this capacity to overcome boundaries and transcend our limits. And this, to me, has turned into a passion for technology and innovation, because I believe at its best, technology is the embodiment of human creativity in the world. I believe that at its best, technology is the literalization of human imagination in the world. I believe that technology at its best allows us to turn the human mind inside out and impregnate the world with mind and creativity. The cognitive philosophers David Chalmers and Andy Clark, these guys describe technology as a scaffolding of mind that we use to extend our thoughts, our reach, and our vision. And it has always been so. If you go back 100,000 years to the savannas of Africa, when early hominids first picked up a stick on the ground and used that stick to reach a fruit that was on a really high tree branch, we've been using our sticks, our tools, our instruments to overcome our boundaries and to transcend our limits. We've been in a symbiotic relationship with our tools and technology since the dawn of humankind. As the philosopher Marshall McLuhan famously said, first we built the tools, and then the tools build us. Now, today we're living in an age of exponential disruption, transformative change. The world is being upended by technological acceleration. The acceleration itself is accelerating, and we're all feeling a sense of vertigo. We're feeling a sense of apprehension. We're overwhelmed by the pace of change. It's like we can't quite keep up. It feels like the rug is being pulled from underneath our feet. It seems to be speeding beyond our intuition or our capacity to fully grasp. And the question is, why is this, right? Why are we living in this age of transformational disruption? And the reason for that is because technological progress, technological change is exponential. But human beings think about change in a linear fashion, right? Our intuition about change is linear. We have linear lenses, but we live in an exponential world. And so what's the difference between linear change and exponential change? One of my heroes, the famed futurist Ray Kurzweil, who is the head of engineering at Google now, and he wrote the book, The Singularity is Near, When Humans Transcend Biology. He has a great example that he uses. It's called the 30 Steps example, but it's a very effective way to get people to wrap their heads around exponential change, right? So that we can start thinking exponentially about how to address the grand challenges of humanity, even when they seem impossibly complex and beyond our reach. So here's the example. If you take 30 linear steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, by step 30, you're at 30, right? 30 linear steps gets us to 30. That's our intuition about change over time. That's our instinct. That's our wiring. That is not the world that we live in today. Now, if you take those same amount of steps, 30 steps, but you do so exponentially, you get to 1 billion. 30 linear steps gets you to 30. 30 exponential steps gets you to 1 billion. That's the reason the smartphone in your pocket today is 1 million times cheaper, 1 million times smaller, and 1,000 times more powerful than what used to be a $60 million supercomputer that was half a building in size 40 years ago. So wrap your head around that astounding capacity, that astounding progress, right? It used to be $60 million to get a supercomputer the size of this auditorium that you needed special permission to get access to 40 years ago. And in those 40 years, we've shrunk down to devices in our pockets, 1 million times cheaper, 1 million times smaller, 1,000 times more powerful. How does this change what becomes possible? How does this change what we can potentiate in the world, what we can bring forth in the world? The folks at Singularity University talk about how a young person in rural Africa today with a smartphone has better communications technology than a head of state had 25 years ago. The supercomputers to change the world are literally in everybody's hands. What will we do with such power? What will we do with such potential? There's a wonderful Time magazine cover story a couple of years back. Bill Clinton was on the cover. It was called A Case for Optimism. And in his op-ed, he talked about this United Nations study, I believe it was from 2010, that cited the cell phone as probably the greatest invention in history to pull people out of poverty. How might the world change on the back of these exponentially emerging technologies? Stephen Johnson talks about the concept of the adjacent possible. The adjacent possible. At the perimeters of human possibility, the adjacent possible is like a shadow from the future that hovers over the present and provides a map of all the ways in which the present can reinvent itself. In the next 25 years, right, because these exponential trends are continuing, these smartphones will likely shrink down to devices the size of blood cells that will go in our bodies and brains, reverse engineering us from inside out. These trends are not slowing down. Now, I travel around the world and I talk about exponential technologies to different types of audiences, and as astounding as this progress has been, people will often say, okay, fine, I buy that because I've seen it. I've seen the computers shrink down. I've seen the cell phones get more powerful in real time. I feel the vertigo, but I've seen it, so I believe it. But what about the world of flesh and concrete, the world in which we dwell? Certainly that's not subject to this exponential transformation and disruption, but it turns out that software really is eating the world. Biology is becoming an information technology, and the physical environment is becoming an information technology. So let's start with biology. Biotechnology means mastering the information processes of biology, because it turns out that we are made of code. It turns out that we are made of language. We are linguistic all the way down. We are alphabetic to the core. Our genes are little software programs, and our capacity to program biology, to program our genes away from disease and away from aging, is accelerating exponentially. Gene sequencing, the speed at which we can sequence our genes, is accelerating 3 times faster than these exponential numbers I've talked about before. 3 times faster than Moore's law. How might this change what it means to be human? The X Prize Foundation recently had a prize, a $10 million prize, to the first team around the world that could create a medical tricorder, a smartphone-sized device employing lab-on-a-chip technologies that could diagnose you better than 10 board-certified doctors. Imagine deploying that in rural and disconnected parts of the world. How does this change healthcare? How does this change access to diagnostic tools? Larry Page from Google created Calico, California Life Extension Company, a software company for biology. What happens when biology becomes a programmable medium? Freeman Dyson, the physicist, envisions a near future where a new generation of artists will write genomes with the fluency that Blake and Byron wrote verses. But of course, technology is a double-edged sword. I don't have to tell you guys that. These tools and technologies could be co-opted to nefarious ends as well, right? With synthetic biology, somebody could create a pathogen that kills 1 billion people. That's also true. And so how do we use these technologies to make the world better, to amplify creativity and possibility, rather than allow these tools to fall into the hands of the wrong person? Nanotechnology. Nanotechnology is advancing exponentially, will allow us to pattern atoms, the building blocks of the physical world, the way we pattern ones and zeros when we create digital things. So when the physical world on the back of nanotechnology becomes a programmable medium, we will potentially be living inside the condensation of human imagination, for sure. The seminal book on nanotechnology is called Engines of Creation. And that's literally what nanotechnology will allow us to do. Peter Diamandis in Stephen Kotler's book Abundance, Why the Future Will Be Better Than You Think, talks about how technology is a resource-liberating mechanism and scarcity is contextual. And on the back of nanotechnology, entire notions of human scarcity disappear because we can manipulate atoms and make anything we want. You can probably imagine the nightmare scenarios of that as well. Artificial intelligence continues to advance exponentially. Non-biological intelligence, distributed intelligence, non-biological cognition, which in symbiosis with human intelligence turns us essentially into a cyborg species, right? The mind as it exists today emerges in the feedback loops between brains, tools, and environments. So we have a responsibility to create tools and environments that will augment our capacity to improve ourselves. The idea of self-determination on crack, to be honest. So these three overlapping revolutions, biotechnology, nanotechnology, and artificial intelligence, promise to upend the human condition. We could potentially address the grand challenges of humanity on the back of these exponential tools. Things that seem impossible are actually within reach. But it's up to each and every one of you, to be honest, to make sure that happens. The consciousnesses of those who employ these tools is what will determine if we engender a utopia beyond time or if we manifest our worst impulses and nightmares in the world. We could disclose heaven or we could disclose hell on earth. Now, I'm a video guy, I'm a storyteller. I choose optimism. I choose to provide a narrative of what might be, of what we may engender if we have the will, if we exercise the agency and the abiding belief that we can make this a better world. I like, the ideas of Steven Pinker. I loved his TED Talk, The Myth of Violence. I found it reassuring to learn that in spite of all the fucked up shit in the world, we're actually less violent than we've ever been as a species, and that the chances of a man dying at the hands of another man today are the lowest than they've ever been, ever. We must not succumb to despair. We must not become fatalistic. We have a lot to do, right? Things are not, justice doesn't reign supreme in the world. We should all feel a faint disquiet when we get up in the morning if we're not doing something to make this a better world. Yet at the same time, there has been astounding progress. Things are tilting towards the better. And we must not forget this either. I'd like to show you a video now that celebrates these emerging technologies and what they might assist us in bringing forth. So if you can please play the first video, The Future of Us.
So let's talk about the future of us. What does that even mean? The future of us. It's a look at what comes next. It's a look at what might be. Because today, exponentially emerging technologies are transforming what's possible. They're helping us overcome, transcend even biological limitations. The very rules of what it is to be human are up for grabs. We're rewriting the software of life with biotechnology. We're turning matter into a programmable medium with nanotechnology. We're creating sentient minds with artificial intelligence that are not bound by the limitations of biology. These three overlapping revolutions, GNR, genetics, nanotechnology, and robotics, together will be leveraged to lead us towards a black hole-like, impossible to fathom singularity. It's like staring into the sun, a moment of a rousing symphonic climax when all of mind, leveraged and networked together, transcends its biological origins, and we become something more. People worry about the AIs and the them. Well, as Kurzweil says, that's going to be us. The future of us is ours to dream up.
You know, Marshall McLuhan used to say, it's always been the artist who realizes that the future is the present and uses his work to prepare the grounds for it. See, what becomes possible on the back of these technologies is going to force us to make a cognitive leap, right? Once the mind is stretched by a new idea, it never returns to its original position. So the challenge becomes to transcend the been there's and done that's of the adult mind and to see the world as if through the eyes of a child. What might we achieve? What might we engender? Now, I could geek out for hours about these technologies, but if we don't employ these technologies to impact the world in a positive way, then it's all for nothing. As long as suffering exists in the world, then, to be honest, it's all for nothing. But that's the point, right? Exponential progress also means exponential opportunity, exponential hope, right? We can turn our passing illuminations into abiding light. In Silicon Valley, the mythology of the singularity envisions a future where humans transcend biology, where indefinite lifespans reign supreme, where scarcity doesn't exist anymore, where the human imagination is fully unbounded, all of us living in virtual realities that are freeing us from the limits of space and time. I mean, I could talk forever about the singularity, but there are problems right now that need to be addressed. How might each of us impact our community, impact the world? Even neurochemically, we get rewarded for making positive social change. It's called the helper's high. Our brain rewards us for altruism. Our brain rewards us for extending our hands towards those in need. Perhaps the answer to the epidemic of anxiety and despair of our age is actually to extend our compassion, right? Empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight, but these technologies at the very least could extend our line of sight. Look at how much more there is to do, and look how much more power we have to do it. I remember I came across this notion of redefining the billionaire. In the age of exponential technologies, everybody wants to create the next startup that makes them a billionaire, and it's cool to be ambitious, I suppose, but how much more existentially relevant would the term becoming a billionaire be if we redefined it to mean a billionaire in the age of exponential technologies is somebody who positively touches 1 billion people? Much more interesting. And you'll probably still make $1 billion if that's your thing. But a reason to get up in the morning is the possibility for that kind of scale and that kind of impact that is possible on the back of these technologies. To positively touch 1 billion people. You all have that fire in the belly. You're all here because you give a shit. You each have the power. You should each engender the ambition to positively touch 1 billion minds. That resolves our existential paradox. Finite beings who want to make a dent in the universe. Here's your chance. This next video, which was shot with a smartphone to exemplify the idea that in our pockets are the tools to impact millions, is called The Captains of Spaceship Earth. Please play the next video.
We live in a world of exponential technological advancement.
What this literally means is that we have new construction kits for our reality, new tools with which to probe at the adjacent possible. So consider the implications, right? As Marshall McLuhan used to say, first we build the tools, and then the tools build us. We are designed by what we have designed. There are these feedback loops of mind, tool, and world that radically redefine our boundaries, that radically transform what it means to be human. To be human today is to crisscross the skies. To be human today is to create technosocial wormholes, mind-to-mind communication that overcomes the limits of time, space, and distance. And so what do? Well, we need to radically reach out to one another in ways that we haven't before. There's a great line that says empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight. In other words, if it's out of sight, it is out of mind. But if anything, these wireless communication technologies are radically extending our line of sight. They're providing new ontological maps of the real. They're giving us the astronaut overview effect. We are seeing the big picture. We are seeing that we are the captains of Spaceship Earth. And what shall we do? We need to extend our hands to one another. We've never had such tools to overcome all of the limitations of our humanity. We have the power, we have the will, we have the capacity, the creative capacity to overcome our limits. And so today, billions of us linking to one another, creating a global node, a global brain. What is the new definition of billionaire? The new definition of billionaire is he who will positively affect the lives of a billion people. He or she who will reach out and say, I will positively affect the lives of a billion people. This should be our goal. This is our responsibility. Here's our chance.
Believe it's possible, guys. The future of freedom means leveraging these exponential technologies to make this a better world. The future of freedom is the future of creativity, the future of our tools, the future of social impact, the future of positively affecting a billion people. But you know what it also is? The future of consciousness, the future of cognitive liberty, the freedom to dissolve mental barriers, the freedom to transcend the limits of our own consciousness without fear of persecution. One of the most exciting areas of disruptive research these days is the use of psychedelic compounds to address the epidemic of imprisonment of anxiety and depression, the 800,000 suicides a year that, according to the United Nations, is a greater number of lives lost than what we're losing from armed conflict and natural disasters combined. You saw Rick Doblin speak yesterday, no doubt, one of the heroes in this space. And for those of you who are not fully aware of what becomes possible on the back of technologies of ecstasy, as I call them, for the future of freedom, please watch this closing video. And thank you for your attention. Please play the last video.
There's a lot of excitement in the media these days about the clinical potential, the applications, the therapeutic potential of psychedelics, mind-altering chemicals. Recent clinical trials out of Johns Hopkins University, led by Roland Griffiths, as well as NYU, led by Stephen Ross, have found some striking results. They've done studies with people suffering from treatment-resistant depression, people who are addicted to cigarettes and haven't been able to quit, people suffering from end-of-life anxiety stemming from, let's say, a cancer diagnosis. I mean, real, intense, treatment-resistant anxiety and depression. And what they found is that a single guided session in a controlled environment with carefully screened patients and trained therapists to guide the experience, these substances effectively catalyze a mystical experience of transformative and lasting change, allowing patients to have seemingly spiritual, divine encounters with the cosmos. And psychedelics seem to do this by disrupting something neuroscientists call the default mode network. In many ways, the autobiographical ego. Default mode network is like the conductor of the mind. People suffering from depression and anxiety tend to have an overly active default mode network, a terrible tyrant, a nagging voice in their head, excessive rumination and self-consciousness that clouds their judgment and allows them to instead collapse into a black hole that not even light can get out of. And most of the time we've been treating this by numbing the symptoms, giving people drugs that zombify them but don't provide any real lasting cathartic valley. What psychedelics seem to do through inducing the mystical experience by silencing the broadcast of the ego is allowing people to go deep and address their soul sickness from a meaning-making perspective, right? The idea that these are substances that are like microscopes for the cosmos of our minds, telescopes for the universe within our consciousness. And then going in there through these guided sessions allow us to recontextualize the self as a marvelous conduit through a timeless whole from which molecules and meanings flow, right? And so what happens after this? Patients come out of the experience no longer afraid of death, no longer depressed, quitting seemingly a 30-year cigarette habit overnight. I mean, these experiences shape and transform us for the better and have a lasting quality that is beyond anything we've ever seen in psychiatry, providing experts with a kind of revolution of the mind and a revolution for dealing with mental health in this country, which today is at an epidemic level. So my friends, be excited. Fund this research. Put your support behind the therapeutic potential of psychedelic research.
Thank you so much, guys, for your attention. Blessings to all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
On the 21st of September 2001, there was a knock on my uncle's door in the capital city of Eritrea, Asmara. It was still early in the morning, and my uncle was still in bed with his wife, who was 7 months pregnant, and their 2-year-old baby who was sleeping peacefully next to them. He got up to open the door and came back a few minutes later to tell his wife that some policemen wanted to speak to him, that he was going to be back later that afternoon. 17 years later, my uncle has still not come home. My name is Vanessa Bayer. I'm an Eritrean who was born and raised in Sweden, and 5 years ago, I decided to start campaigning for my uncle, Siem Sahaya's release. And it wasn't until then that I realized that my uncle's imprisonment was about so much more than just him. You see, 2001 was a crucial point in Eritrea's history. And its importance came from a promise that had been made by the leaders who liberated the country 10 years earlier. When the guerrilla group EPLF won the 30-year-long war of independence from Ethiopia, the group became a political party, the PFDJ, and the guerrilla leader became the president. Isaias Afwerki became the president. The war had been fought on the premise of a search for democracy, justice, and equality, but there were no elections. Eritreans were promised that the lack of democracy only was temporary. The new government needed time to establish democracy, and so the people gave them time. This temporary period was supposed to end in 2001. It'd been 10 years since independence, and the brutal war with Ethiopia had finally ended. The first elections were finally scheduled to happen. But tensions were in the air. There was a clear understanding amongst everyone involved that the events of 2001 was going to set the blueprint for the newly established nation. And this led all interested parties to fight hard for their vision of Eritrea to become reality. My uncle was a known, fearless, and vocal man. Even during the War of Independence, he was challenging the leadership, and he was even imprisoned for a whole year for going around speaking too much about democracy while working as a teacher in the guerrilla camps during the war. During the war, he was also a prominent and brilliant photographer and documentary maker, and his work was known all around the world. After independence, he became the director of the national television channel, ERI-TV. But because he continued to challenge the leadership, he was demoted from that very powerful position to a less powerful position in the Ministry of Tourism. Eventually, Siem quit and became a freelance journalist focusing on the well-being of the Eritrean people. And as the government's policies became more and more authoritarian, his reporting intensified. When students protesting new policies that violated their human rights in April of 2001 were detained and even killed in prison, my uncle wrote that the leaders of today are killing the leaders of the future. He urged the government to have an open dialogue with the people to ensure the best result for the future. At the same time, a group of 15 politicians and high-ranking military personnel published an open letter to the president, criticizing the fact that no election preparations seemed to be being made for the election that was scheduled to happen later that year. They called his regime illegal and unconstitutional. They were warned not to continue, but they did, and they did so loudly. They spoke to local and international media, and the issue grew bigger. And then finally, on the 18th of September 2001, when the entire world's eyes were riveted on New York and the terrorist attacks that had happened only a week earlier, the government took that opportunity and imprisoned 10 journalists, including my uncle, and 11 politicians who had been a part of the public outcry for democracy. They shut down all free press, and the press has not been opened since then. Until this day, no one's been charged, prosecuted, or been given an official reason for their imprisonment. Until this day, the only information that we have about our relatives' conditions and whereabouts are from prison guards who have fled the prisons. They say that they're held in a maximum security prison in the middle of the desert, where it's burning hot during the day and freezing cold during the night, and with their hands and legs tied like this 24 hours per day. Until this day, no one has been allowed to visit them, and no one has been released. Since then, Eritrea has been governed without a constitution, parliament, and any elections. And it's turned into one of the most censored countries in the entire world. It is the only country in Africa without any independent media at all. There's barely any access to the internet. Only 2% of all households have access to the internet, and even then, it's heavily surveilled by the government. There's no civic society whatsoever. The only university in the country has been shut down, and there's not a single person in the country that publicly can criticize the government. Any sign of opposition is met with intimidation, imprisonment, or death, and this intimidation reaches all the way to the diaspora. When my uncle was warned about the risks of his work, he replied, "If we don't give them a voice, no one will." And he was right. Imprisoning my uncle and his colleagues was a part of a wider plan by the Eritrean president to gain ultimate control over the Eritrean people. A shutdown of the press is a shutdown of democracy as a whole. And that is why that week in September of 2001 has been referred to as the week Eritrea officially became a dictatorship. By silencing the people who already were speaking up against their crimes, shutting down institutions that would encourage and facilitate dialogue and debate, and creating an environment where the price to speak up is your life, the Eritrean government is free to do whatever it wants without any criticism. Today, the Eritrean people is suffering immensely. In a country of only 5 million people, there are over 300 prisons where thousands of people are held without any trial for any reason that you can imagine. The conditions and torture in these prisons are beyond anyone's imagination. And in 2015, a United Nations Commission accused Eritrea for committing crimes against humanity for the crimes that they're committing in these prisons. There is no religious freedom. There's no freedom of association. There's no freedom of movement. Eritreans don't have the right to leave the country unless they are granted an exit visa, a permission from the government. And these permissions are rarely given because they want them to stay in the country. But the biggest victims of this dictatorship is the youth population. Aforkis Eritrea is robbing the youth from their future. Young people are forced to spend their last year of high school in military service. After this, they have to serve in a mandatory national service program. The problem isn't that Eritrea has a national service or military service per se. A lot of countries have the same programs. The problem is the brutal treatment of these workers and the fact that it goes on indefinitely. Once you're enrolled, you don't ever leave. The 2015 UN report likened this program to slavery. Not only are the people in the national service program being extremely maltreated and abused, but the potential that they could have developed and used to contribute to their country and the world is being completely wasted. Youth are forced to choose between a life in Eritrea with no future or a life on flight where they encounter unimaginable horrors, traumatizing and even killing them. Over 5,000 people flee every month, choosing to rather risk dying on flight than stay as slaves. The leaders of today are killing the leaders of the future, just like my uncle warned in 2001. I was born and raised in Sweden, very far away from my uncle in Eritrea. But despite the great distance between us, my mom made sure that my uncle's story, her brother's story, was always very present in my life. When I started high school, I decided it was time for me to take action on his behalf. I was frustrated by the silence around my uncle's case and about my country in general, and I realized that I was part of the problem. I was 16 years old. I was old enough to take on the responsibility. And for 3 years, I've been a part of a very active Amnesty International group, which meant that I had some campaigning skills. I also lived in a country where the right to protest and speak up was at my very disposal. I had no excuse to remain silent. On the anniversary of his arrest in 2013, I launched the organization One Day See Him with a mission to put my uncle's name back on the map. We started off with an internet campaign with a video and petition, and created an advocacy group at 3 different high schools in Sweden. Our launch was profiled on the front page of Sweden's biggest newspaper, and quickly the word started spreading. Since then, we've continued to loudly advocate on behalf of my uncle and his colleagues who were imprisoned alongside him. We've used political and legal advocacy, international campaigns, video series, and ambassadors at schools and universities all around the world to raise awareness about human rights abuses in Eritrea. One Day See Him is motivated by my uncle's strong commitment to democracy, accountability, and the freedom of expression. See Him recognized the power of words, and we're simply using his own tactics to free him. We do everything in our power to make sure that my uncle and his colleagues are not forgotten. And at the same time, we share the stories of the Eritrean people that my uncle and his colleagues would have shared if they were free and here today. The same stories that the president and the government are trying to hide. I raised my voice because the price not to is too high. My country is held hostage, we're risking at seeing a lost generation, and the world is completely silent. I raised my voice because that silence is sustaining the power of the regime. I raised my voice because it is my duty. I am an Eritrean who was lucky enough to be born outside of the country. That luck and that distance does not erase my responsibility for my people, it amplifies it. And I raised my voice because it is what my uncle taught me to do. If I don't do it, if we don't do it, then who will? Many of us are lucky. We have the tools to speak up and protest. We have no excuse to remain silent. We have to use that luck, that power, to speak up for the people of Eritrea, regardless of how long it's going to take for change to come. Because the fact that it's going to be a long journey cannot deter us. No dictatorship has ever lasted forever, but they do last longer if they're left unchallenged. I will dedicate the rest of my life, if I have to see the day that not only my uncle finally can come home, but that the Eritrea that he fought for and that he's been fighting for 17 years, where all Eritreans truly are free, finally becomes reality. And I urge every single one of you to join me in whatever way that you can. Thank you very much.
No podrán contra toda Nicaragua. No podrán aún les lancen piedras y balas. No podrán contra el sonar de miles de corazones, unidos esta vez por la libertad. Lo siento, abuelita, no hice caso y me fui. No pude quedarme quieto. No pude quedarme ahí sin moverme. Solo viendo morir a mis hermanos. Los chavalos aguerridos luchando hasta morir. Lo siento, madre, no pude quedarme quieto. Contra todos no podrán, porque el amor es lo que nos mueve. El amor a la madre patria que quiero defender.
Buenos días.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to begin with a short account of a long story. My country, Nicaragua, began the 20th century with a dictatorship. This 16-year dictatorship of General Zelaya, it was overthrown by an armed uprising in 1909. This led to a foreign military intervention which lasted until 1933. A year later, the Somoza family dynasty was installed. This dynasty was overthrown by a bloody armed rebellion in the 70s. In the 80s, we had another civil war between the Sandinistas and the Contras, with the aggravating circumstance that our country was a pawn of the Cold War. Dictatorships, wars, foreign military interventions. That's how we spent the 20th century here in Nicaragua. After tens of thousands of casualties, peace finally came in 1990. Tough negotiations between the sides pinned against each other in the war in that decade opened the road to peace through elections. Upholding these elections was the key to a transition that would bring peace to the country and lay the foundations of a democratic regime for the first time in our history. Let me repeat that, for the first time in our history. I was born in the 80s, in the midst of the revolution, in the midst of the war, at the heart of a family that taught me to respect the ideas of the general of free men, Augusto Sandino. These are ideas that are underpinned by the motto, homeland and freedom. Being a Sandinista in a torn society involved family oppositions. My father, like thousands of young people of his generation, was committed to the Sandinista revolution, yearning to change the history of the country. Unfortunately, his hopes were dashed. Instead of social justice, progress, and democracy, we reaped war and regression. 30 years after, Nicaragua, after having peace, is now the second poorest country in Latin America. And it is exactly for that reason that I decided to study economics, believing as a teenager that as this is the science of the efficient distribution of scarce resources, I could contribute to solving the problem of poverty in my country. After graduating as an economist, I was confronted with a harsh reality. Economists can recommend policy, but the ones who take decisions are the politicians. In one of life's chance occurrences, a very dear neighbor, the poet Vidaluz Meneses, may she rest in peace, invited me to a political meeting of the Sandinista renovation movement. Very quickly, I was elected member of the national leadership of the party, and then I became a member of the National Assembly in Nicaragua. I came into politics on the cusp of a transition in our democracy, and step by step, I experienced the brutality of the dismantling of democracy. The party to which I belonged was declared illegal. I was a victim of physical attacks and death threats by the repressive forces of Daniel Ortega's regime. Later on, I was arbitrarily ousted from my parliamentary seat along with 25 other members. Our crime was opposing the regime. The dictatorial regime became entrenched, but this only renewed our strength and spirit to fight for freedom and for justice. And so here I am, and so here we are, the people of Nicaragua, with our undaunted dreams, facing major challenges, but with the same passion in our hearts as on the first day. Starting in 2007, the year in which Daniel Ortega took office, a systematic process began of a breakdown, one by one, of the fundamental pillars of representative democracy. The rule of law was gone. The will of people mocked by repeated electoral fraud. There was arbitrary removal from office of elected representatives, parliamentarians, mayors, city councilors. The freedoms and rights of the citizens, including the right to life, were violated. Political organizations were outlawed. The independence of the powers of the state were annulled, and the armed forces were subordinated to Ortega's personal wills. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a case of an imperfect democracy or of a competitive authoritarianism. No, ladies and gentlemen, this is a case of an outright dictatorial regime. Until April 18th, the regime had been able to escape the scrutiny of the international community. Governments and international organizations were aware of the abuses wrought by Ortega, yet they focused their attention on other countries. Aiding to camouflage the regime was the apparent passivity of the Nicaraguan people. This passivity was usually taken as a sign of support, but the reality was that they were afraid. However, the growing economic, political, and social grievances finally overtook the patience of the people, and this gave rise to the peaceful youth-led civic rebellion of the 18th of April. These were very brave young people. And the straw that broke the camel's back was the imposition of barbaric reforms to the Social Security system, which was virtually bankrupt because of the corrupt misappropriation of funds, total corruption. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights provided an anatomy of the regime. In its report of May 21st, it documented 76 people killed, 886 wounded, 438 arrests, and an undetermined number of missing people. It reads like a war report, but that's not what it is. Yet this fateful list of figures increases day by day. Above and beyond of the killed and the wounded and the arrests, the report also points out in black and white that there were illegal and arbitrary arrests, cases of torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, censorship and attacks against the press, and other forms of intimidation, threats, harassment, and persecution aimed at disbanding the protests and inhibiting citizen participation. These are crimes against humanity, ladies and gentlemen. The ICHR patently stated that the repression was carried out by the national police and by its anti-riot forces and para-police groups. But even more brutally, the regime used public hospitals, which are paid by the taxes of the Nicaraguan people, as means of repression. And according to that very same report, under the rules from on high, the wounded were denied treatment. Today, in Nicaragua, it's Mother's Day. The entire country has gone out to the streets, being with those mothers who've lost their children, those mothers who don't know where their children are because they're missing, the mothers who are taking care of the injured. Today's Mother's Day. That's the kind of Mother's Day we're having today in Nicaragua. Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark, for decades, showed generosity and support for the process of peace and democracy in Nicaragua. To their people and governments and organizations, I once again make a call for you to turn your gaze to Nicaragua. The countries and institutions of the European Union have always maintained close ties of cooperation with my country. I appeal to the European Parliament, the governments of the EU, the High Representative for External Affairs, the Special Representative for Human Rights. I call on you to once again turn your gaze upon Nicaragua, raise your voice in support for the struggle for freedom, to liberate Nicaragua. To the United States, To the United Nations, to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, I ask you to turn your gaze to take concrete action in favor of freedom and justice in Nicaragua. What are we asking for in Nicaragua? What are our demands? Justice. Those who committed these crimes against humanity must be judged. We must end the violence against peaceful protesters. We must have free and fair elections. We must be able to decide which country we want to live in. And to you, friends who are here today, I ask for your solidarity. And your solidarity can be made a realization today. Take a selfie. Ask for the end to violence. Use the hashtag SOS Nicaragua. I'm asking for your solidarity with the people of Nicaragua. They are being slaughtered because they are fighting for freedom and justice. Please don't let our sacrifice be a sacrifice in vain. And as our great poet Ruben Dario has said, I would assure to you, Nicaragua, it will be free because Nicaragua is made of vigor and glory, and Nicaragua is made for freedom. Thank you.
I could not come to this place if I had been arrested with my friends who went to demonstration on the 4th anniversary of the coup, requesting the election from the junta. I would like to salute them, their goodwill and democracy spirit that they try to bring for us, to preserve for us in Thailand. My life was hardly any different from the average Thai student growing up in Thailand. I was raised in a lower middle class Thai family. I was an average student in school. I paid no interest to politics and kept mandatory crew cut hairstyle and strict enforcement of uniforms. That is until one time, as a student journalist, I drafted an article questioning why teachers had to interfere with student hate. I asked a teacher who I trusted to review the article. Within a few hours later, I heard an announcement on the loudspeaker summoning me to the school office. There, I faced 5 hours of interrogation simply for posing the question why teachers had to interfere on student hate. This experience transformed me in the eyes of the teachers into the one as a student who posed as a threat to school security, which I took to be my greatest compliment. In 2014, General Prayut Chan-o-cha led the Thai army to launch a coup d'etat. They established a junta to govern the country. There were widespread against the junta, and in response, they were arrested protesters. This wasn't the first time that Thailand government had crushed a protest movement. 40 years ago, student activists were brutally massacred by rabid nationalist forces in equivalent of Tiananmen Square in China. So, in 2016, as a student at Chulalongkorn University, an institution viewed as a bastion of conservatism, my classmates and I decided to take the historic event and organize commemorate activities. I invited Joshua Wong, a fellow student activist from Hong Kong, to address a forum in the hopes that he would inspire a new generation of Thais who could learn from him. Instead, I was shocked when I went to the airport and waited for 8 hours, but he didn't come. Later, I learned that he has been detained by the Thai authorities and sent back the next morning to the Hong Kong. This marked the first time that I felt that under a military government, the Thai nation had lost the freedom we once cherished, and my country was now under the influence of Chinese imperial power. The following year, I was elected as the president of Student Council in my university. Along with 7 fellow students, I stayed a walkout from the pledging ceremony for the freshmen, where all students were required to prostrate in the front of Rama V statue. Instead, I chose to stand, a universal gesture that also conformed with the wishes of the Rama V in his attempts to modernize our country. This attracted the eye of one of the lecturers, who put my friend in a chokehold. The university also accused me of being disobedient and claimed that we had staged the event. Various alumni associations called for my dismissal. This resulted in me being removed from the position as the president of Student Council, and along with 7 other students, we faced disciplinary action. We faced punishment more severe than if we committed the theft. In the book for the punishment in my university, it said that if you act on a theft for the first time, it will deduct 20 points of yours, but we have been deducted 25 points. It was on this occasion that I was showered with kindness and a goodwill from academics worldwide. 8 Nobel laureates and hundreds of academics voiced their concern and called for the university to reconsider their actions, but to no avail. We were just students wanting to voice our opinions. We were not carrying any weapons, but instead we were silenced. Recently in Thailand, a student intern uncovered a huge corruption scandal involving officials embracing funds meant for the poor. Military values are being actively imposed in Thai schools. They are adding civil education, which does not support critical thinking at all, but to teach you to be a good, obedient student. The person at the helm of the Anti-Corruption Bureau is the former aide of the infamous minister, who possession as many as 25 luxury watches has remained untouched. The new constitution allows for the junta party to be ensured of its existence in the future, and the Senate now are being appointed rather than being elected. All this doesn't include the enforcement of the lèse-majesté law that is used to clamp down on free speech and get rid of people with dissenting opinions. For example, my friend, who is an activist, his name is Pai Dowdin, who shared a BBC News article, were arrested, but another 2,600 people who shared with him were not. This year, also as a result of my involvement in activities calling for democratic election to be held, I was handed yet special honor. I was charged of being a ringleader, instigating trouble, causing dissent, and violating the junta orders. This may result in sentence of 6 to 7 years imprisonment. And just few minutes before, I heard from my friend from Thailand that I also have been in another chart. I am quite certain that the seeds of a hope planted for a better Thai society will never disappear. Few months ago, I went to delay my conscription. I wore 5 watches each hand to be a symbolic act against the infamous Minister of Defense, who said that he had borrowed 25 luxury watches from his dead friend. So I borrowed them from still alive friends. This became big news in Thailand, and millions of people watching me approvingly. And few days ago, when the coup has been on the 4th anniversary, the Facebook page which support the junta did the poll asking people if they still support the junta. Surprisingly, 90% from 300,000 people said no. The protests came and fell, but sometimes we have been arrested. Sometimes the soldiers came to their homes. But people in Thailand now, they never give up. They fail, but they fail better. And the time is going to come that what we are doing is right. Recently, a friend of mine at university and I have started our own student publishing on campus. We translate many good books into Thai. I also have published my own book entitled A Bad Student in an Excellent Educational System, which this book is already sold out and in its second printing. I hope that what I have talked about today will enable us to see Thailand in a more rounded manner. Being a mass of being a popular Western destination, I urge you, European Union activists around the world, to support our fight for democracy and put pressure on the junta to hold the elections, not delay anymore, not postpone anymore. And this time, I would like you to show your solidarity with me by stand up and show our 3 fingers like this. These fingers, 3 fingers, the junta is really afraid, but I am sure that you will not arrested in this room. So please show with me. Truth prevails. Thank you very much. Again.
It all began when my best friend emailed me on February 9th, 2011. He disappeared 3 days later, and I didn't know that would be the last I'd ever hear from him. My friend was emailing me to help him organize protests in Tripoli that would happen at the same time in Benghazi on February 17th. You may remember this. This was the uprisings, the beginning of the uprisings in Libya. In no time, violence spread, and then there was an intervention, and then it was war. We never really had the chance to mobilize. At first, I wasn't so sure I would get involved. The escalation was surreal, and I was shell-shocked. But when I heard that my friend was executed in detention, I decided to join the 17 February coalition in the humanitarian sector. I helped set up a field hospital in Tripoli for when the rebels took over. But the waiting was long. It was 8 months of fear, of propaganda, getting used to curfews, getting accustomed to being disconnected from the world, long bow cuts, dwindling resources. And then August finally came, and the rebel took over the city in one day. It was surprising. Tripoli was supposed to be the stronghold of the dictator. At the same day, I joined the field hospital as a field nurse, and then later the military hospital. When I worked there, in the couple of months I worked there, I saw the war not as I saw it in the headlines, but I saw the atrocities committed. And I was in an even darker place. For a couple of weeks, we received remains of mass graves of people executed during the 8 months, and some were even older. I helped families and friends identify their loved ones. I saw their heartbreak when they recognized the face, but I also saw their agony and despair when they couldn't see a feature in the decomposing bodies. Since February, I was on one side, the uprising against the dictatorship. At that point, I took an even stronger stance. And what I felt was the pure dehumanization of Gaddafi's forces. I reflected on it one night. I reflected on the rage and the grief that was consuming me. And I thought, that wasn't me. So the next morning, I went to the doctor who was in charge, and I asked him to assign me to work on Gaddafi's forces. No one went there voluntarily, only doctors helped. Their ward was always empty and guarded. But for some time, I dedicated myself to feeding them, cleaning them, helping them to the toilet, and giving them medications. I thought I was punishing myself. I wore a bracelet with the opposition flag. I never spoke to them, and I wanted them to see which side I was on. Until one very early morning, I was giving a round of antibiotics, and this young man looks at me, and in his eyes, the bewilderment and grief mirrored mine, and he said, "You make me feel inhuman." And the realization hit me very deeply that we were both Libyans, caught in this war that we did not decide or plan for, thrown on opposite sides. And at that point, we did not really understand why it happened the way it happened. So I sat next to him and held his hand, and we wept for a while. We didn't speak, I didn't see him again, but he allowed me to see his humanity. It wasn't so long after that I started to see the atrocities the side I was on was committing. I was disillusioned and left my post. But I was restless. I needed to do something. I needed to contribute to my country. As a young woman, there was no space for me in a formal structure. So I thought I would join civil society because I realized Libyan civil society was the only space at that time where people from different backgrounds on different sides were willing to talk to each other. People who have opposing opinions are willing to sit together and work to find a solution for Libya. So I worked at a psychosocial center for traumatized children and youth that helped children both cope with their trauma, but also gave the youth the space to mobilize, volunteer, help rebuild the country. I was part of many initiatives, from workshops of youth empowerment, preparation to election, to women's rights issues. Civil society work is not easy. It's exhausting and time-consuming. Activists are often working too hard and stretched too thin. But for a brief period of a little over a year, we had the freedom to work and protest every week. But then, in 2014, the war broke out again. Many activists, friends, and colleagues were assassinated, and we thought that we lost hope altogether in Libya. That was the last year I protested in Tripoli. When you hear about the world war, when you see it on the news, when you read about it in books and watch it in movies, you know about the blood, the rubble, the destruction, the loss. That is true, but it's part of it. You don't know about the people who continue to live through war. You don't know about the students who graduate in front of their bombed campus, the instability that hangs on your head like a sword, how it is to live not knowing what would happen to you and your loved ones. They don't tell you about the broken trust in the community, but they also don't tell you about the teachers who raise new generations, the women who start up businesses to help their communities. They don't tell you about the people who get up in the morning hearing the shelling and the bombing, and they would still go to their work and classes. In the midst of images of rubble and despair, they don't tell you about all those amazing people who take the active, conscious choice to resist the war by building lives. Knowing, meeting, and hearing about these resilient people, I could not give up on peace and civil society in Libya. And they are on all sides. They are in the government, in associations, in organizations, and yes, even in armed groups. Every single person in Libya have either witnessed or experienced the horrors of war. Yet we all try to keep the hope and the beauty of everyday life. I decided to pursue my master's degree in peace and conflict. I wanted to make myself the most useful tool for peace work. And what years of activism and war taught me is that we won't succeed unless we coordinate our efforts and that we are well prepared for peace. I know it is difficult to sit and talk with someone you've put on the other side or someone you thought of as the enemy, but they are part of the solution. And if we want to end the war, we need to engage with everyone. It is not enough to have foundations, organizations, parties. We need to work together. We need to coordinate, and we need to be more effective and efficient about it. That's why I've been working to raise capacities of civil society organizations and peace networks in Libya, to transfer knowledge and skills and prepare them and help them prepare for their peace work. We've spent years fighting, resisting, and tearing things down. Now, we have to build the society we want together. Thank you.
We're running a little behind schedule here, so we're going to take a very short break. We'll be back in the theater at 11:45 sharp because we have a very special guest who will be joining us. See you after the break.
Ibrahim came to the Oslo Freedom Forum in 2010. He was here because he had refused as a politician, and I mention that term because it's very difficult sometimes to expect that politicians will actually do what is in the interests of their people. Most of the time, politicians do what is in their own self-interest. If it happens to overlap with the interests of the people, then that ends up doing very well for those of us who are part of the people. But most of the time, that doesn't happen in a lot of the world. So for us, it was great to have him at the Oslo Freedom Forum because he stood against one-party rule in Malaysia. Malaysia is a country that has had the same party in power since independence. And that party, he was a member of. And then he decided, I'm not going to play this game anymore. And instead of becoming the prime minister, he chose a life in the opposition. And he paid a very dear price for that. 1,500 days in prison since he spoke at the Oslo Freedom Forum in 2010. And you know, a lot of times we listen to so many different stories and how difficult it is to bring about transformation and how the options seem limited. Oftentimes people think that perhaps, you know, American foreign policy thinks that if you just bomb a place, it's going to solve the problem. And that's not really working very well. Nonviolent resistance, on the other hand, works. And Anwar Ibrahim is an example of that. Anwar Ibrahim is an inspiration for how nonviolent resistance can actually bring change and can bring a transformation that does not involve tanks on the streets or intervention or anything that approximates violence. So for us, it's a real pleasure that we're able to speak with Anwar Ibrahim just a few days after he has been released from prison and he's back with his family. The connection may be a little spotty, because he's using internet, and I don't think they have Telenor in Malaysia. So if you're from Telenor, that's a plug. So please, it may be a little checkered, but we're going to try and see if we can make this work. Anwar, are you able? Can you see me?
Yes, very clearly. Smart as always. Thank you.
Anwar, what I can see is an audience full of people. And the camera's right there. If I could only flip it against the audience, you'd get to see them. How are you, Anwar?
Well, I'm glad to be out and enjoy my freedom.
I can imagine
as I said, the first day yes, that one can only appreciate the true meaning of freedom when one experiences incarceration. And that is a great experience for me, to be not only alive, but kicking, and with the full support of the Malaysian people.
So Anwar, your daughter came here to the Oslo Freedom Forum after you were imprisoned, and she was a certain trumpet in describing the change that you wanted to bring to Malaysia, the change that she has devoted her own life to, that your family has paid such a dear price for. What are the prospects of the return for rule of law and democracy in Malaysia?
Before that talk, 10.5 years of incarceration, most of it in solitary confinement. I do not regret a minute. Why? Because you have seen this phenomenal change, transformation, a peaceful transformation, a strong protest and resistance against authoritarian rule, against corruption and kleptocracy, and translating it into the ballot box. And this is a great experience, and I feel really jubilant, ecstatic that the people now have decided through the ballot box.
Well, we're jubilant with you. And so what are the prospects of restoring rule of law in Malaysia?
Right now, of course, I'm taking a back seat. I'm supposed to assume the premiership in matter of a year or two or less. But then the agenda is clear, is non-negotiable: judicial freedom, free media, free and fair elections, an economy that must be transparent, that promotes growth, but champion the cause of the ordinary people.
This is great news for us. It's sort of music to the ears of those who are coming from places where they think that that's not achievable. What message do you have to those people in this community and to those who are watching about nonviolent resistance and about persistence and being able to achieve what you have achieved?
5 years ago, almost virtually all analysts, political analysts, nationally, internationally, has ruled out any possibility of a peaceful transition through the ballot box because elections are rigged. The process conducted by the Election Commission is flawed, so you cannot expect change to be achieved through democratic elections. But now, it is the reality, because we did not win by 2 or 3%. There's a total upsurge of people rejecting the authoritarian regime, which means, therefore, what I have said consistently, even at the Oslo Freedom Forum when I attended, what makes it tick is that we trust in the wisdom of the people. We have to work hard to reach out, disseminate information, and have this sense of conviction that finally the people and truth will triumph.
Now, Anwar, in some countries, as you mentioned, the electoral system is controlled by the government. They are the ones who count the votes. They are the ones who allow the free media, or what is left of it, to operate. In your case, it was, what you're telling me is it was overwhelming participation by the citizenry and a victory so large that the authoritarians couldn't cover it up. What about those cases where it's a lot more difficult? I realize this is a tough question, but what message do you have in those circumstances?
Well, the battle has been protracted in our case for the last 20 years. I was first incarcerated in 1998. So it is through a persistent effort, unrelenting effort by activists, reformists who believe in the agenda for reform. In the first elections, 1999, it was almost impossible. We managed to garner 5 seats. Then we went ahead in every elections, trying hard and to reach the people. More challenging is, of course, the rural heartland, but we did. It took us 20 long, dreadful years, and 10 years of it in incarceration, solitary confinement. But it's worth the effort. Never give up. There's always the streak of confidence. Sometimes it is just like, to me, it is still miraculous. I expected a win. I did not expect this large margin of winning by 50,000, 40,000 votes in each constituency.
Well, would you accept our invitation to open the next Freedom Forum here in Oslo in 2019?
The forum has done an enormous contribution in the cause of freedom and democracy. I'm a small fry. I will be dictated by you and follow your instructions. And if you say attend the forum, I will certainly be the first one to do so.
Well,
I need not inaugurate. I will be a good participant in the forum.
Well, coming as the Prime Minister of Malaysia, as the next Premier of Malaysia, it will be for us an enormous pleasure to have you here. Anwar Ibrahim, thank you very much. Good luck. You're in our thoughts. We send you wonderful energy, and let's keep this dialogue going. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
What a wonderful agenda just articulated by Anwar Ibrahim. I am privileged to have just come from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, where I was personally able to experience the absolute euphoria of the people there as they watched him walk out from jail a free man. And I know that his sacrifice and his courage and his determination was what helped galvanize that extraordinary election turnout and that change of opinion, that tsunami that swept that entrenched government from power through the ballot box, through a democratic election. I just hope that that gives inspiration to some of you here who are challenging entrenched regimes, because nobody thought it could happen in that way, peacefully and by the ballot box. But it did. And perhaps by talking to you now, I'll be able to explain some of the ways in which that happened. No one thought, none of the experts, none of the analysts, and indeed so many of the activists that I spoke to, that this could actually happen, because the power of the Barisan national government was so entrenched. Najib Razak and his powerful wife there had centralized the government after so many decades in power into an absolute knot of autocratic control. Anwar dominated both the finance ministry and the prime ministry. Together with a coterie of crony businessmen, they controlled the economy. The media was reduced to a propaganda tool for the government. Parliament was a puppet. You know these kind of regimes. So easy for them to manipulate the election when it came. Everybody thought, because of course the independence of the judiciary, the independence of the civil service had been undermined over years. And of course, what had been a successful opposition movement under Anwar had been absolutely negated by his imprisonment, orchestrated by Najib himself. His wife and his daughter were left tragically trying to hold an opposition together that was, of course, riven by factionalism. It looked hopeless. Najib, under pressure, strengthened his powers in the months coming up to the election. He brought in one of the first fake news laws in the world, which was deliberately directed at frightening and intimidating even social media users from saying things against the government. He brought in an anti-terror law, which he happily used to lock up people who criticized him without any trial. He brought in emergency powers, so if the worst came to the worst, we all feared, as we could feel that tsunami of opinion developing against him, we feared that he would just cancel the election and institute the end of democracy in Malaysia. So facing that situation, an intimidated electorate, fearful of the upcoming election and what might happen after, what was the role of a journalist? And I guess I should now introduce myself. I am a journalist, and for nearly a decade I've been covering corruption issues in Malaysia. Why did I think that was worthwhile? Why was I doing it? And this is because I believe that information is power, and that journalists bring information to the people. And I had found a way of getting past this extraordinary control of the media that had developed in Malaysia. The internet, I was able to communicate out through the internet in my own language, English, to Malaysians who could then, again, through social media, bring all that through in their own language, translated via WhatsApp, right down to the guy in the village, what I was finding out and had to tell them. The fact that my website was banned, in the end, didn't seem to matter so much. How come a British journalist was involved in these Malaysian issues? Well, I had my links. I was born in Sarawak, and I had started this whole investigation into corruption by going back to the place of my birth and seeing the impact of poor governance, of corruption, at ground level on the people who were affected. Indigenous people thrown out from their lands, an environmental disaster as the Borneo rainforest, the third largest in the world, was being ripped out for timber extraction and palm oil exploitation. And what I could see was that this was purely for the benefit of a handful of people and not at all for the benefit of the majority. And doesn't that add up? Isn't that the problem we have? Particularly interesting to me was the role of global finance and global institutions in this form of corruption. People from the West, bankers, institutions, were helping siphon out that wealth from the scene of the crime through the offshore system and into our own economies, bringing their corruption with them. All these issues, I felt, were of enormous interest, not just to people in Malaysia, but to all of us here across the world. Now, 1MDB was the corruption story. I did so many, but this was the one where I was able to get global attention and really bring together Malaysians on a story that went straight to the door of the Prime Minister himself. 1MDB was a development fund set up by Najib and his powerful wife, together with a very enterprising, characterful young Chinese-Malaysian financier named Joe Low. Joe Low was very good at working out, blagging banks into transferring the odd billion across the globe, you know. And the banks were eagerly gullible, I would say, in many of these cases. This development fund was clearly losing money by the time I looked into it in 2015. Now a total of 8 billion and more is officially missing from that fund. And it was clear that that Najib was making investments through 1MDB that were then disappearing. I became entranced when I discovered that the film Wolf of Wall Street was being financed by the son of the Prime Minister, the supposed producer of this movie. And when I discovered that his ubiquitous at his side was none other than this young financier, Joe Low. And I started to put two and two together to look into whether maybe some of that missing money was going into Najib's family's filmmaking enterprises. And you will know that Wolf of Wall Street is all about a bunch of young thieves who scandalously spend millions in the most disgraceful excesses. So I started looking into these young producers and began to realize that what went on in the movies was nothing compared to the lifestyle of these young men and the money that they were splashing around the world. So I took on the story, and it was fun to write, it was fun to research, and I think, with a sort of horrid fascination, Malaysia and later the world followed the antics whereby you could see these boys buying yachts worth £250 million, properties in New York, mansions in Beverly Hills. They were part of the super society of Hollywood. They were jetting the likes of Leo DiCaprio, Miranda Kerr, Paris Hilton, off to places like Las Vegas, where they were hosting great casino parties and incredible jaw-dropping events, drenched with Cristal champagne, bikini serving girls by the score, dancing dwarves, caged lions, you name it. It was outrageous. And of course, remember, this was all Malaysia's development money, borrowed at high interest rates. I kept this story going, as hard as I could. But as you can imagine, as the whistleblowers started coming forward, and I was starting to actually nail that, yes, I could prove this money was coming from 1MDB, things started to get very tricky indeed. And when I came with the final sort of bombshell story, which was that $700 million could be traced from 1MDB into the Prime Minister's own personal bank account, it came in just before the 2013 election, which he won, which, in fact, Anwar won the popular vote, but thanks to gerrymandering, Barisan Nasional kept power. This was the big story that really caused me trouble and woke Malaysia up to what was going on. Najib could not deny he'd received the money. He said it was a gift from a mystery, anonymous Arab prince. My audience, my readership, were left to decide who they believed. And of course, a great deal of money and effort went into vilifying me, intimidating me. Back home in England, a warrant for my arrest was issued for issuing false news in Malaysia. My blog was banned. And indeed, Najib even tried to issue a red notice alert to have me extradited back to Malaysia as a terrorist, luckily rejected by Interpol. But what my journalism had managed to achieve was the attention of the international regulators. Najib used all his powers to close down this investigation in Malaysia, of course, but the DOJ and FBI came in on the trail, as did many other regulators, and they started to stand up my story. They brought in the facts. They showed how the money had indeed gone from 1MDB into the excesses of Joe Low and his friends, into Najib's bank account. And we had this war of attrition, really, for the last 2 years running up to the election. Me trying to keep the story going, withstand the pressure, the legal cases and all the rest, and backed up by the very believable evidence of the international regulators. And I think that played its part in bringing together that public opinion in Malaysia that understood the threat of this regime, that felt it could do what it liked, plundered what it liked, and it brought a unity. The 92-year-old former strongman of Malaysia led that coalition against Najib, supported by reformists, some of whom he put in jail in the past. He adopted their reform agenda. They laid aside their differences, and at the top of their agenda was a commitment to get Anwar Ibrahim out of jail. So I hope that by bringing information to the people, I played my part in that, and I think I would like to leave that message that the role of an independent media is so important to achieving democratic change. Thank you. Thank you.
My mother was a child bride. At least I think she was. By the time my father died, she was 19 years old. My elder sister was 2 years, and I was 9 months. And therefore, I think by the time my mother got married, she was 16 years old. Though we never spoke about it, it changed the course of her life and all our lives as well. My mother was limited by what she could do and what she could not do as a girl, growing up in a patriarchal community that still places obstacles in the success and happiness of many women and girls today. Because of child marriage, she was deprived of a happy childhood and pulled out of school. Because of a lack of health care, information, and sexual education, she got pregnant at a young age. When my father died, my mother was left alone with no skills, no opportunities. My mother had to struggle for herself to find a way to take care of us. It was really heartbreaking. The thing is, no one ever talks about any of these issues in Uganda. Uganda's culture is so full of taboos that you cannot easily say, I'm going to the toilet, but you can say, I'm going to the back room. While I was growing up, I saw my sister taking what I called certain kind of bread. I did not notice that she was taking sanitary pads simply because in Uganda we never talk about anything like that. If a girl gets pregnant, she is simply married off. No one supports her or gives her the health care she needs. And as a result, thousands of young mothers end up dying at childbirth. This is really very common. Very many of us know someone, a sister, a relative, a cousin who has died while they are trying to give birth. And this is something that needs to be addressed, I feel. Stigma also keeps most women silent about what they experience, and most men wouldn't care to hear or act on what they have to say anyway. My mother never even told me about the challenges she faced. Even up to this moment, she has never faced me to tell me that maybe use a condom, maybe protect yourself in this way. Anything to deal with sexual education, she can never face me. And it does not happen to me, but also other young people in society. They just end up growing and discovering for themselves, which is sometimes very dangerous. These taboos, these barriers of silence prevent our society from moving forward and developing. They perpetuate poverty, misery, inequality, and injustice. Child marriage, reproductive rights, and girls' access to education are often written off as women's issues. But what we never acknowledge is that they affect every single person in our community because they prevent girls and their children from achieving their true potential. I didn't realize at the time, but I had a very difficult childhood. All around me, the cycle of poverty churned on, depriving children and our community at large of a bright future we could have had. We will never really address the challenges facing Uganda if we don't discuss them openly and debate solutions. For example, the HIV/AIDS campaign in Uganda. Over the previous years, the government was spreading a message, making us very scared of HIV and making people having HIV seem to look so bad, and all the dramas around HIV were something that were so nasty about HIV/AIDS people, and this created some kind of backlash, and it backfired. But at the end of the day, when the government changed the message these days, the communication comes that HIV/AIDS affected people can take antiretroviral drugs, and it shows that they can survive, and also they are human. The message has changed, and everything in the country looks like it's coming back again. Alike when it comes to child marriage, my community's silence makes us blind to the ways child marriage shapes our lives and futures. I was lucky because of a combination of luck and persistence. In my case, my mother was able to provide for us. She moved back to my grandparents' home, managed to get a certificate, a teaching certificate, and was able to take us to school. And through her school, she managed to bring to me books. She brought from fairy tales, and I was introduced later on to prominent writers like Shakespeare, Austen, the Bronte sisters, and that really shaped my life and my career. I don't really consider myself a successful person. I don't own a house, but I drive a car and manage to pay rent in a nice apartment. Yet so many young people in Uganda see me as a very successful person. The reason being that maybe 70% of the people I studied with, or I was with at primary level, dropped out of school. They couldn't afford the education. Some got married at that stage, and therefore today I look out. My story is a rare one, and yet because I had access to a full education and books that allowed me to see beyond poverty. I've always told my countrymen that I always thought I am very rich, or we are rich as a nation, until the time I traveled to Norway in 2017, and I discovered how miserable our nation was. It was my mother that made the difference for me. She defied the odds, but not everyone can do that, or should even have to. If we want to interconnect the ills of child marriage, poor health care, and poverty, then we need to talk about these issues, about how poverty leads to child marriage, which leads to poor access to education, which leads again to poverty. When we break the silence, we can make a start to break the patterns that emerge. Today, as a young man and entrepreneur, I feel that the best way I can help my community is by breaking this silence, by talking about these issues, by telling these stories. And therefore, I've used the books to tell these stories, and I've also used film, simply because I'm looking for where the audience is. If people are busy watching television and on their phones, I'm also taking the message to where they are. Therefore, I've created Uliwood, the Ugandan Hollywood, and we are trying, and we are trying to create stories that communicate different messages about young people's health, about their education, to global audiences. And I've also worked along with some organization called Plan International. We've been able to work on a project called My Body, My Future. And we've managed to go to different schools, collected 39,000 signatures from young people who feel the government needs to give them more information, more services on their health. And we've petitioned the government, and the government has responded by legislation that it is providing more services and health information to young people. And I think that's the way forward for the nation, and it's a very positive for us. For me, these projects about exercising about exercising my freedom of speech, freedom of expression. If we want to change our society, then we must break through these walls of silence to recognize the ways our traditions and taboos hold us back, so that we can give everyone the full and rewarding future they deserve. Uganda has the youngest population in the world. The youngest population in the world. And we are living in a world of broken dreams. But I want to transform this from a world of broken dreams to a world of potential, and a world that can hope and make a difference. And this is the reason why I decide to speak out and say, we must change this story. Thank you very much.
It's been 10 years since I accidentally became an activist. During this journey, I've done some rights and many wrongs. I was inspired by the highs, and I was humbled by the lows. I embraced my pain and celebrated my joy. Today, I'm grateful for Human Rights Foundation for giving me the opportunity to share some of the lessons that I've personally learned during those 10 years. But let me first spend the next few minutes giving you an idea of what I have went through that made me stand up here in front of you. Not long after I tweeted this, I was walking in a dark street in Cairo. It was after midnight. I got sucker punched on my head. I fell on the floor, to only find 4 armed men who grabbed me and threw me into a car. They blindfolded me and ordered me to look down. And they told me not to speak. I didn't know where I was going. I have never been terrified like this in my whole life. For the next 11 days, I was handcuffed, blindfolded, and beaten up. They stripped me out of everything, including my own name. They called me 41. Dark was all I saw. Morning, noon, and night ran all together. And the screams of torture outside my cell woke me up at night. Before that, my life was very normal. I had a family of a wife and 2 kids. I was working as a tech executive at Google. And I was very busy doing the ordinary things. And everything for me changed, took a complete route of change when I saw one photo on my Facebook feed. It was a corpse of a young man. His name was Khalid Saeed. Khalid was tortured to death by local police. I was overwhelmed with anguish and powerlessness. The photo of his mangled face moved me so much. So I decided to create a page on Facebook, and I called it We're All Khalid Saeed. This page, with the help of many other activists, helped spark the protests that led to the downfall of Mubarak. When I was arrested as an anonymous activist. Nobody knew who I was. But when I came out of jail after 11 days, I became an accidental celebrity. I came out to a world that was completely foreign to me. There was 1 million people in Tahrir Square, 1 million followers on that Facebook page, and I was overwhelmed by the media attention. My face became recognized by a lot of people that I don't know. And I was totally over my head. I felt exposed and confused, loved and idolized by some, and hated and attacked by others. But what really struck me was the attacks that came from people I thought I was fighting for. The downfall of Mubarak, however, filled me with a lot of hope. Just like millions of Egyptians, we thought that the dream of a free and democratic Egypt is about to be realized. And instead of that, the dream, however, turned into a nightmare. In the course of the next 2 years, destructive polarization brought the worst out of everyone. June 2013 happened, and the first democratically elected president was forced out of power after massive protests. Police officers shot live ammunition at local protesters, and terrorist groups started killing civilians and military personnel. Thousands were killed, and tens of thousands were imprisoned, among them a lot of my dear friends. I had no option but to leave the country. But as the plane was taking off, my tears were falling down. The feeling of shame and guilt crushed me. I felt like I abandoned my cause, abandoned my friends, and I betrayed my larger-than-life persona that was thrust upon me against my own will. I went to California, and I tried to go back to my ordinary life, but it was not a soft landing. I fell down into a sinkhole of depression that I never experienced. I tried to go back to my ordinary life, but I failed. And I found myself last August crying in one of the meeting rooms at the office, and I knew that was it. So I quit my job, and I left my family behind in California, and I traveled to Boston by myself. In Boston, I went through a stage where I could now call graduating from my own depression. Initially, I didn't want to deal with my depression. I was denying it. But I knew that the only way is to actually face it. I realized that just like my prison, the activism that I have done have handcuffed me, blindfolded me, and beating me up. It stripped me out of everything, including my own identity. It took me a total collapse to realize that my soul has been broken and how much I needed this period of introspection. It's the imprisonment in my mind that prompted me to learn more about myself and pushed me to review my past and think of change. Notes to self. It's egotistical to spend time caring about everyone but yourself. 2, don't be conditioned to only project your strength while denying or hiding your feelings of fear, pain, and weakness, especially from those who care about you. 3, your hell is when you violate your own moral values. Your heaven is when you abide by them. 4, question authority. P.S. You are an authority. The belief in oneself and one's own ideas makes an activist willing to take challenges bigger than themselves. The same conviction could lead us also to fall victim of our own egos. Social media provided us with a great opportunity to propagate our ideas and ideals, but it also posed a huge threat because it could go into creating self-serving activism cults that feed our ego. Notes to self. 1, public attention is a means, not a goal. 2, make your ego a vehicle for your cause. Don't make your cause a vehicle for your ego. 3, those who speak on behalf of a cause could harm it the most. Keep your mouth shut until you have something useful to say. 4, don't fall into the trap of seeking the adrenaline rush of likes, shares, and follows. 5, attention is a scarce resource. We all know that. But empathy dignity, and courage is even scarcer. Activists are the prophets of their causes. Our success is in winning people over, not alienating them. If we spend our time only engaging with our fellow activists and people who agree with us, we're not really working for a cause. We're just creating a self-serving cult. Our power is in our own voice. And when dealing with our opponents, we need the level of restraint that we demand for a well-trained police officer. Notes to self. 1, stop being extreme and exclusive while advocating for tolerance and diversity. 2, cops are not bastards. Activists are not saints. Focus your energy on fixing systems and creating accountability for everyone. 3, it's biologically rewarding when you dehumanize your opponents. They like doing that to you too. 4, spend your time engaging with your opponents. Read what you disagree with. 5, if you want to alienate people, it's simple. Insult them. As an activist, there is always a part in me that's willfully naive and relentlessly optimistic. But it's this naive optimism that tries to bridge the gap between the present and a better future. However, I found that this could take you into a whiff of arrogance. In absence of a balance, such arrogance could be damaging to our causes. Our superpower is to stick to our core values, and one of those critical core values is to honestly seek the truth. Note to self. Stop believing in falsehood that confirms your biases while condemning your opponents for lying. 2, 99% of conspiracy theories are false. Hence, you will never find the 1% where you expect them to be. 3, the more you are emotionally invested, the less likely you are going to be rational. 4, don't listen to the angry, loud voices. They usually lack substance. It's easy for us to engage in fault-finding within any system. But it's important to remember that every system has plenty of faults, and that we are products of that system as much as the system is a product of us. We need to spend more time and energy working on building a collective vision for what we want, not only spend time protesting what we don't want. Notes to self. Sorry. 1, the more fundamental a change is, the more time it requires people to embrace it. 2, don't take part in an angry mob. Take part in a movement that channels your anger in something productive. 3, idealism is our anchor, but compromise is inevitable. 4, conservatives need liberals for progress. Liberals need conservatives for stability. 5, don't alienate the insiders. Join their efforts to derive positive changes from within the system. Before I end my speech, as we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Oslo Freedom Forum, on this occasion, I wanted to share with you this very special photo of me. I was 10 years old, and I was protesting inequality at home. But on a more serious note, I'd love to pass to all of you a beautiful note that a friend of mine wrote on my birthday. Dear friends, I wish you all will continue to be free enough from the ground to unfuck systems, but I also wish you have enough roots to feel home. I wish that your confidence always keep you strong, but I also wish you will have enough humbleness that would allow you to receive love. I wish you the wisdom to know that you have reached no truth. I wish you all a continuous pursuit. Thank you very much.
First of all, sorry for my English. I wish I could tell you that I fly in from Azerbaijan, but I am living in exile now. Arif, my husband of 40 years, and I were forced to leave our homeland in 2016, after it was made clear to us that the regime efforts to silence us will continue until our death. We joined our daughter Dinara in Netherlands. It's meeting in the airport. Dinara was in Netherlands only because in 2009 we were able to secure asylum for her after the regime tried to silence us by threatening to kidnapping our daughter and sell her to human traffickers. We was born in USSR, and the KGB first arrested my husband in 1976. The world was already aware of the horrors in the Soviet Union, so we concentrate our efforts on working from within. I joined an underground dissident movement in the middle of the 1980s, and later became one of the founders and the only female member of the board of National Democratic Movement for Independence Azerbaijan from Soviet Union. After the fall of the Soviet Union, we all have great hopes for future. We believe that we could live in independence and democratic Azerbaijan Republic. But in 1993, a general of KGB, the leader of the Communist Party, Heydar Aliyev, became the president of Azerbaijan Republic. And he started a horrible repression already from this time. My wonderful friends, brave officers, died in prison after tortures. Heydar Aliyev's government was cemented in blood, torture, and overall violence from the very beginning. Since 1993, the Aliyev's family has been ruling Azerbaijan. We have bloody dictatorship. But we wanted a democratic transition, and we decided that we will fight openly in public, before the eyes of the regime, but also before the eyes of the civil society. And that is why we created non-government organization Institute for Peace in Democracy in 1995. Our institute became very popular in Azerbaijan. People from all over the country asked for our help in case of tortures, forced disappearances, killings, and corruption. We worked on creating a historical archive of state-sponsored repression and violence. We put together a list of prisoners of conscience. We monitored trials. We gathered data of torture case, and we reported on all of this. It's one of our meetings. It was when it was not so horrible repressions. At the same point, we have a list of more than 700 prisoners of conscience. More than 700 in Azerbaijan, where the population no more than 10 million. We became known also for rewarding judges who pace sentence on political orders with stripped robes. It's our famous judges. It was nice presentation. In 2011, we became aware that more than 60,000 citizens were being illegally deprived of their homes by the regime in our capital, Baku. Believe it or no, this is still happening in 2018. Our investigation revealed that many people had been forced out of their homes and been made homeless. Their homes were bulldozed and they stayed homeless. Under the eyes of the police, we managed to publish a report and put together an advocacy campaign online. It's me, it's my colleagues, and as usually, police attacked us. On August 10, 2011, New York Times reported on our efforts, and the next day, President Ilham Aliyev gave the order to destroy our home, which also served as the Institute's office. On the evening, August 11, we too became homeless. We lost everything. It's how they destroyed in evening. We lost everything, including computer, library, and most important, our comprehensive archive. On August 11, we were not in Baku, we were here in Norway, but we returned to Baku to continue our struggle. My last ordeal in Azerbaijan took place after my husband Arif and I were arrested in 2014, following a long-lasting wave of repression after the deputies of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe voted against the resolution Political Prisoners in Azerbaijan at the January session 2013. Can you imagine? Special rapporteur from Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe on Azerbaijan, Pedro Argamund, from Spain, spoke 2 times during the session. He's saying that there are no political prisoners in Azerbaijan. We were in shock. Our institute had contributed significantly to make this resolution possible. The passé deputies opened the green light to the most brutal political repression in Azerbaijan. 1 week later, from February 4, the arrests started. Spending no less than 3 billion euros to buy the European politicians and deputies, our dictator organized horrible repression against human rights defenders, journalists, bloggers, and activists of opposition parties. Only in 2017, we received information about this international money laundering scam. In May 2018, this month, only four deputies of Parliament Assembly of Council of Europe were formally punished. 4. But how many people were arrested during 2013, 2018? How many people were tortured in prison? And how many people died after tortures in prison? And the repressions continue till today. Every week we receive information about new arrests. Last week, 5 guys from opposition party Popular Front was arrested, and 1 died already after tortures. I would like to avoid a detailed recount of Arif's and my days in prison, but I can tell you we were beaten, tortured, and denied medical attention until our health became extremely frail. We received freedom only after great support. It's me, before prison and after, 1 year. We received freedom only after great support from the international community, with the support of our friends and international human rights organizations, with the support of our daughter. Last month, in April this year, Azerbaijan dictator Aliyev won yet another president term in sham elections. This is Aliyev's 4th term since 2003, when he replaced his father in yet another sham election. In Azerbaijan, elections are never free and fair. In Azerbaijan, there are no separation of powers, with the justice system serving as a proxy for the dictatorship. 161 prisoners of conscience today complete the picture. Some people stay in prison more than 10 years, some people stay more than 20 years. People in detention centers die from tortures regularly. In 2007, you can see these boys stay without father now. Both of them died last year in May. He is a famous blogger. He just writes something in Facebook, and he was arrested and tortured. He writes in Facebook, "I do not want to be slave." Just. It's colonial. They was tortured and died. In 2017, many people died after tortures. There are only the 7 cases that were able to confirm. This boy was born in 1995, and he died in 2017. It was horrible tortures. I received all information. So dictator Ilham Aliyev won. He won with the support, with the help of the European and American politicians, to whom he paid a lot of money. In 2015, Aliyev organized the first European Olympic Games in Baku. Democracies like France, Germany, Great Britain, and this one, Norway, sent the athletes to Baku to take part in these games. Lady Gaga was there. She received $2 million to sing about freedom. I remember her singing Imagine. I remember her song so clear because I was watching from prison. I felt ignored, forgotten, trampled. Arif and I have made a new start now in Netherlands, but we refuse to stay still while people in Azerbaijan continue to be hostages of our dictator. Remember this name. He will guest in Berlin, Paris, London, Washington, this bloody dictator. And his single aim is to continue accumulating wealth and power. I stand here with a request. I ask you, people in free countries, to help us identify and denounce the powerful and wealthy people who benefit from Azerbaijan's oil-rich kleptocracy. These people visit Norway, they own villas in France, apartments in New York, homes in London. Their children go to the top universities in democracies. Help us raise our voice so that they cannot enjoy their wealth in the West. Help us to raise our voice against this horrible dictatorship. Each week, the people die. I ask for freedom, and that you use your freedom to denounce those who oppress and loot Azerbaijan. The journey into night started for me and my husband. He now puts these pictures here. In the 1970s. It's been more than 40 years. So please help us out of this darkness. We need support and solidarity very much.
This photograph of Tanker Man is one of the most famous images of the 20th century. It was taken during the 1989 massacre. For nearly 30 years, people have wondered what became of the Tanker Man. But his identity, his fate are still mystery. The mystery lingers primarily because the Chinese government has made every effort to suppress the truth about what happened at Tiananmen. To this day, people in China who dare to remember face brutal persecution. Although I do not know who the tank man was, I do know many other tank men, by which I mean Tiananmen heroes. I was a student protester in Tiananmen Square when the massacre began. I witnessed the many people killed, including the 11 students who were chased and run over by tanks on the morning of June 4th at Liubukou on Chang'an Avenue. These were 2 student bodies we helped collect and carry to hospital. In this tragic episode, there was a student who was much luckier than those who lost their lives on the spot. He was run over, but lost only his both legs. His name is Fang Zheng. Fang Zheng is a tank man, a living evidence of the massacre, a voice of truth, and an inspiring hero we all love and admire. Please join me in welcoming my friend and fellow activist, Mr. Fang Zheng. 大家刚才都看到了那张。
You just saw the famous picture, Tank Man, and it represented the courage of the Chinese people in resisting tyranny on June 4th, 1989. In 2009, when I arrived in America, I saw this picture in many friends' homes. When they learned that my legs were run over by a tank in Beijing, a lot of people couldn't believe it. They asked me with surprise, weren't the tanks blocked? Yes, Wong stopped the tanks. I was in my senior year at Beijing Sports University in 1989. I was an athlete. Just like any other regular student, I was actively involved in the Tiananmen Square-based pro-democracy movement. We had so much hope for the nation. We hoped that China could continue the reform by curbing corruption, eliminating bureaucracy, granting more speech and political freedom to people. Students marched in demonstration, sat down, and staged hunger strikes. With all these peaceful acts, we just hope the Chinese leadership will accept our demands. However, the rulers of the era were intransigent and ignored our pleas to evolve because they thought that our demands challenged their rules. So they decided to deploy troops to brutally crush our peaceful democracy movement. The night of June 3rd, the Chinese government issued stern warnings on radio and television. The crackdowns began. About 10 p.m. on June 3rd, the Chinese government deployed about 200,000 troops, Entertainment Square and the center of Beijing by force, as citizens and students attempted to stop them with their bodies. At the time, I was with the last 3,000 or so students staying in the square, and we just sat around the Tiananmen monument.
In the small hours of June 4th, after a few hours of June 3rd, the troops surrounded the Tiananmen Square. There were a lot of casualties already in Tiananmen Square. Everybody was nervous. The situation was tense. I encountered a junior student, a female student of mine. She was very frightened. She wanted to stay with me, and I said, sure, that's okay. I'm a man. I will protect you. You'll be safe with me. That's what I told her. So we sat around by the monument. The bullets actually just flew over our heads, ricocheting off the monument in showers of sparks. The rows of tanks pushed forward slowly, toppling the Goddess of Democracy statue erected by demonstrators. And the tanks also flattened tents set up by the students. Soldiers with live ammunition overran peaceful students to reach the monuments, attacking students as they progressed. Here, I have to mention Mr. Liu Xiaobo, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2010. Unfortunately, he passed away last year under the persecution of the Chinese government. He was with us then. He risked his life representing the students in negotiation with the troops, which eventually allowed the demonstrating students to evacuate Tiananmen Square peacefully. About 4 a.m. on June 4th, about 2,000 or 3,000 students retreated from the southeastern corner of the square we then walked west on Tian Street, and then we went to the Chang'an Avenue, arriving a corner called Liubukou. And at that time, it was about 6 a.m. The day was breaking, and then I was walking hand in hand with that fellow female student. Chang'an Avenue was very empty. Suddenly, we heard explosions behind us, and a gas bomb exploded next to us. And then we saw this thick smoke. We were suffocating and felt nauseated. We couldn't see anything. What I first thought about my companion, because she already fainted, and then I picked her up to move her to the side. When I was doing that, and I kind of noticed a tank heading west from east. So meaning that it was coming behind me, and it quickly showed up in front of me. And then I could feel the pressure of the tank gun. There was no time to avoid it. And then so what I did was I quickly pushed my companion to the guardrail. I fell on the ground. And then I felt this tight squeezing sensation as the tank ran over my legs. Then I felt that the tank dragged me for a distance with a thumping sound as the track of the tank tore off my legs and pants. In about 3 to 5 seconds, I fell from the track and rolled to the curb of the guardrail. As my consciousness fading, I noticed the exposed bones of what remained of my legs. I am grateful to this photographer who recorded this gruesome scene as an ironclad evidence of this atrocity. And I'm also very grateful to the people who rescued me and stopped me from bleeding to death. So this is a massacre that happened around 6 a.m. on June 4th in Tiananmen Square. And then the Chinese government used tanks to kill students. A lot of people were injured, a lot of people died. From June 4th, we didn't know how many people lost their lives. This still remains a mystery. Because after June 4th, the Chinese government used all kinds of means to cover up the truth and the facts. And then they used the government machine, hoping that the people would not tell the truth. Like this female companion who was forced by the government. She denied that we were together at all. I can understand why she did that. Because she wanted to continue her education. She wanted to have a job. Her family needed to live in China. I know a man who was injured by a tank at the Liubukou, now living in the U.S. And I actually told him that maybe one day then there will be the witness of the Liubukou massacre. Then he refused. Why? Because in order to continue his education and then he wanted to go abroad for his education, he wrote an affidavit stating that his injury was caused by a bus, not by a tank. Just like me, for 20 years after June 4th, because I insist on speaking the truth, and I faced a lot of pressure and injustice. I was arrested twice. I didn't have any freedom. After I lost my legs, I returned to sports as a disabled athlete. As a matter of fact, in 1992, I actually won 2 national championships. And I was supposed to represent China in the Far East and the South Pacific Games for the disabled in 1992. But the Chinese government disqualified me because they didn't want people to know the truth how I lost my legs. It has been almost 20 years since June 4th of 1989. Chinese government had become even stronger and tried to use all means to cover up what happened on June 4th. And nobody can see any information on the net or in the media. The Tiananmen mothers who lost their children cannot openly commemorate them. Young students cannot access to any information regarding June 4th. 6/4 is a very sensitive phrase. You cannot even find it on the web. The international community focuses on economic power of China and pays little attention on human rights abuses in China. I was very lucky in 2009, with the help of American government, I moved to the U.S. And then now my family and I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area. I, as a participant in 1989, and as a witness of the atrocity and the massacre of June 4th and 1989, I kept telling people about this. I participate in all kinds of public events, such as this, and I would go to school to talk to students, to tell them what happened then, because I know this is my responsibility. Even when I face the Chinese government, such as powerful government, and it's very hard to keep people to remember, but I'm still going to try. So a few days, it will be the anniversary of 29th anniversary of June 4th. Here, I want you not to forget the massacre incident that took place on June 4th, 1989. I hope you will pay attention to the human rights in China. Don't forget the students' blood in Tiananmen Square. Remember those students' life. Thank you very much.
谢谢大家，中国需要你们的帮助，中国需要人权，谢谢。
It's so incredibly inspiring, so incredibly moving, and it's sometimes so very difficult. It's so very difficult to hear these stories. It's so very difficult to appreciate some of the suffering, and it's I'm very sad here this evening because it feels like a long night. It was a very long night last night for us, and it was a long night last night because of Arkady Babchenko. Arkady Babchenko is a speaker at a Human Rights Foundation event just in March, where he came to speak about human rights violations in Chechnya and state propaganda. And Arkady Babchenko, who's is a larger-than-life figure, last night his wife was in the bathroom in their home in Ukraine, where Arkady had political asylum, having come from Russia. And she heard 3 bangs, and she came out to find that he had been shot 3 times in the back. Arkady Babchenko was assassinated yesterday. His crime is to have been an investigative reporter speaking truths that certain people do not want to hear. And it is Arkady's passing, his killing, that we wish to memorialize at the close of this event by dedicating the closing performance to him. This performance, the words for this performance came from a cell, a Gestapo cell, in the basement of the Gestapo headquarters in Zakopane, Poland. These headquarters had these cells, and a composer visited these cells. His name was Henry Gorecki, and he visited these cells and found that people had scratched with fingernails different things into the walls of these prison cells. And it was remarkable that these scratches were still there. And he looked at the various things that they said. You had people writing things like, "I am innocent," and cursing executioners, "Damn the murderers." You had people with cries of despair, "Someone save me." And amongst all of these things that were written on the plaster of these walls, he found one inscription that moved him deeply, because it had been written by a child, an 18-year-old girl. And it was not a call for revenge. It was not hate. It was not desperation. She wrote, "Oh, Mama, don't weep for me, no. Immaculate Queen of Heaven, always support me." And then she wrote her name. Helena Wanda Lajuskona, 18 years old, arrested 26 September 1944. What was remarkable, the composer didn't say it specifically like this, but she didn't care to express anything other than the sentiment that she felt, that she didn't want her own mother to cry. Her despair was for her own mother and the feelings of her own mother. Ultimately, it left us with a sense that love is what she felt, no doubt, before she was executed. And it is that spirit of love that we would like to end here this evening, this afternoon. And it's Friederike Krumm from Hamburg, Germany, who is going to bring these words in Henry Gorecki's hauntingly beautiful piece. And I'd like to again